Alright, I am back with another video, and today we have some headliners for you today. There's corruption in the higher ranks of the city, there's assassins hiding beneath it, and all in all a new cult might be rising called the Absolute. Now, there's a lot of questions to be answered here, and there's only one person who can answer them. You, our investigative journalist with today's build. Oh, good. Kind of proud of that one. But yes, in an odd twist, I've been playing a lot of the Headliners lately. For those of you that don't know, the Headliners is kind of a multiplayer co-op game where you go into an alien-infested New York, a la Cloverfield, and take a bunch of pictures to produce headlines about what's going on. You're basically press in a war zone. And that kind of got me thinking of how an interesting build could come about from someone who is an investigative journalist. Now, from the little bit of backstory we have about Tav themselves, the player's custom character, it is implied that they were a detective chasing down the Dark Urge at one point. I think there's a lot of headcanon being mixed in there, but at some point there was an allusion to the fact that we might have a detective, so I've kind of pushed that a bit further and gone for an investigative journalist, because I wanted to make a skill monkey build today, a type of build that I've not made in a long time. Someone who's really, really good at a lot of things, would be excellent as the face of the party, and is a great support character, being able to buff their allies through things like, well, let's just get it out of the way because it's obvious, bardic inspiration and such like that. Overall, this build is meant to be a team player, but also a leader, who is going to feel great in the role of a custom character. And again, I liked the idea of making a character who was an investigative journalist, especially with the fact that, with patch 8, you're going to have access to photo mode. So imagine playing through the game as a journalist who actually has access to some sort of magical camera, perhaps maybe made by some gnome artificers, and you're actually using it to take photos of your journey or exposés of the game's various villains. And again, this is going to be a character that gets the best out of almost every skill check in the game. I've omitted a few that I didn't think were relevant in 90% of situations, but if you want to do this build can actually get every single skill proficiency in the game, as well as a few expertise here and there. So overall, you've got a pretty solid lineup here for the actual roleplay side of things. You're going to be able to talk your way through most situations. This build is more about avoiding combat than anything else, but in combat, while it's not the strongest fighter in the world, it can definitely buff its allies with support and stay out of the line of fire in order to keep them safe. You know, do a little bit of healing there if you want, mainly buffing and other support type things, disabling enemies, and also manipulating dice rolls, because I decided to throw a bit of a luck build aspect into this character. So I really, really hope you enjoy it, as at least flavor-wise, it's one of my favorite things to come up with, and I haven't done a proper skill monkey build since, I would say, my original one, where I was able to get all skills by level 4, but that used Githyanki's Astral Knowledge, where in this case, we're not actually using that. We're going about it a different way, because not everyone wants to play a Githyanki. So here we go. If we're going to make a skill monkey build, then we've got to kick things off as a rogue. And when I think of rogues, I don't just think of stabby, steely dudes. I think of people with incredible cunning, wit, and general world experience who are able to go out and do amazing things despite not having the most extraordinary of powers. And in my opinion, an investigative journalist in a fantasy land, especially one as turbulent as the Forgotten Realms, is definitely going to have a strong, solid skill set, which is why we're starting with Rogue. Rogue is going to give us access to the obvious sneak attack, which we will be able to make use out of, because we are going to be using finesse weapons, as well as a decent set of ability scores as well that we can start with. However, we are going to play as a human today, because this is going to give us a few armor and weapon proficiencies if you want to use them, as well as an additional skill proficiency, which is great. Also, we are going to get to choose our skills here. Strength is at 10. We don't have any method of buffing this one really, so having it at the baseline of 10 is fine. Dexterity is at 8, sorry, but it is technically at 18 because we're using the gloves of dexterity here. It was the best way to make this build in the fact that I wanted to have as many of the mental stats be as high as possible without having to sacrifice constitution. If you're definitely against using the gloves of dexterity though, you can swap some things around, but otherwise I really did want to make sure we had at least a solid amount of constitution to be able to survive big hits. So otherwise, yes, dexterity is technically at an 18 here. Constitution is at 16 because, well, I wanted a decent HP pool. Intelligence is at 8 because we are going to be using the Warped Headband of Intellect to bump this up to a 17, so effectively we have a 16 here. Wisdom is at 14 because this is about as high as I could get it with all the other stats being the way that I wanted. them to be. And for our specific purposes here, the only real skill that we're going to want that values wisdom is insight, which by the time this build is done will have both expertise and advantage on those checks, because of course we want insight on this build. Like, we're an investigative journalist, we want to be able to tell if people are lying. Also, charisma is at 17. We're going to be bumping this up with a half feat later, and obviously this is our most important stat for social stuff, which is obviously what we're meant to be best at, as well as it's going to affect our bardic spellcasting a bit later on. Now, for our skill proficiencies, things do get a little bit specific here, so hear me out. I've gone with the sage background because, of course, sage is all about gaining inspiration through learning new knowledge. For an investigative journalist, I think that makes sense, but I can also see somebody making an argument for guild artisan or maybe even noble, which either of those can work, but I do like sage the most. For our human skill proficiency, we've gone with sleight of hand. This is just one of the only ways we can really get it without having to use one of our rogue proficiencies. Stealth, we're obviously going to grab as well. We might as well have a little bit of stealth on the rogue, as it is quite interesting. And of course, we're going to take expertise in investigation. This is going to be an intelligence-based skill, and we are going to be making use of our intelligence all throughout this build. And it's always nice to have a decent amount of intelligence anyway, because you can make saving throws against mind flayers, which I think this character would definitely be able to do. And again, we're an investigative journalist. If I don't have expertise in investigation, I've done something wrong. In a similar vein, we're also going to grab insight expertise as well, allowing us to be always able to tell if someone is lying. And again, we'll have advantage on these checks, so we'll have a +6 here as well as advantage, which is pretty damn good. I'm also going to take perception here as well. Now, you may be thinking, why on earth have I not gone for any of the social skills yet? Well, the way we build this character is a bit specific, and I'll talk about that more as we go through the build, but for right now, this is the baseline of skills that you want to get. If all of this is going a bit too quickly and you don't want to have to fumble through the video to make sure you've got all the right proficiencies and when, feel free to check the description, as for my own sanity I had to lay out how to get these skill proficiencies, so it'll all be there for you as well. But let's move on. Next up at level 2, we're going to want to dip straight over to Bard. Bard is not only going to give us an extra skill proficiency, in which we're going to take Persuasion, which is going to be our main social stat for the early parts of the game, but we're still going to be good at the rest of them. We're also going to be able to grab the typical Bard stuff, like cantrips, and of course, we're going to be throwing out Vicious Mockery, because how could we not? And we're also going to grab Friends to gain advantage on those same charisma checks, which, in this case, I like to flavor it less as being actual magic, but more like you use your, personality and wit to just, get people to say things that they didn't want to say or agree with you when they normally wouldn't. So when the spell wears off, it's actually them just going, wait a minute, I just got completely swindled. Not even charmed, just beaten in conversation, which I think is kind of fun. We're also going to get to choose some spells, and again, you got a wide range of spells here that I think would all work for this build. I obviously want Speak with Animals though. In a fantasy land where speaking with animals is possible, of course an investigative journalist or detective type character he's definitely going to want to be getting those witness accounts from the animals, so I think that makes a ton of sense here. In a similar vein, I also want to grab Heroism. You're not afraid to go into any situation for that juicy golden scoop, that story, that search for the truth. So making yourself immune to frighten and a little bit more tanky also makes sense to me. I could also see Longstrider working, Featherfall making a lot of sense here, Tasha's Hideous Laughter, Command if you're using the 1D&D spell list revisions, which I recommend you do. There's a lot of options available to you here. As I said, you could also go for Healing Magic if you really want to play that more supportive role. Disguise Self is also an option here that I think could make sense. You do kind of get to play around with your choices on this one, although I would say in my testing when I actually did use healing spells, I did find them to be quite helpful in most situations, so I think just having a little bit of light healing in the backline can work, maybe just Healing Word in that sense. And I would say, let's grab Longstrider for that extra speed. We might as well get it. It can always be useful. For your starting instrument, pick your favourite, but I liked for loot for this one. Not entirely sure why, it's just a personal preference. And then, once again, our skill proficiency here is Persuasion. So you're still getting Persuasion right out of the Nautiloid. So you're still going to feel pretty good in conversation off the bat. At Bard level 2, we're going to gain access to Jack of all trades, meaning now that we have half of our proficiency score in anything that we're not already proficient in. Meaning that even the, 3 proficiencies that we don't get, we're still going to be decent at. So, we take those. We're also going to get that awesome Song of Rest for a third short rest every long rest. We're also going to get to choose another spell at this level, and again, it's entirely up to you. I do kind of like the idea of using Bane to make your saving throws against your bullshit a bit harder to kind of get off here, but again, this is concentration, and a lot of the stuff that requires saving throws also uses concentration, so really, it's entirely up to you. I do also like Thunderwave as an offensive option here, because again, this build likes to disengage more often than not, so being able to push people away from you could be really useful, so it's personal preference. At Bard level 3, we get to choose our subclass, and of course we're going to be going with Lore Bard here. Lore Bard is going to give us access to cutting words, allowing us to use our wit to distract creatures and sap their confidence, meaning that we get to do an anti-bardic inspiration, where bardic inspiration would normally buff our allies with a 1d6 to their ability checks and such. This will allow us to debuff our enemies by that same amount. That could be attack rolls or their own saving throws, which can be really nice. We're also going to get to choose 3 new skill proficiencies, and again, you're going to have to bear with me on this one, as I double check my notes to make sure I get the right ones, but I'm pretty sure I know what they are. Yes. So here you're going to want to grab Intimidation, Religion, and Nature. So Nature and Religion are going to be really good checks to have, because obviously there's a lot of religion checks in the game that would be great to pass, and Nature can be useful especially in the first part of the game, but obviously Intimidation is another social skill that we're going to want to get. I will point out now, while it's on my mind since we're talking about Nature, we don't need animal handling in this build. We have Speak with Animals, meaning that rather than using animal handling, we're just going to be using our charisma checks to interact with animals, making animal handling completely useless, so that's not a proficiency that we need. Right, let's move on. At level 4 of Bard, you're going to be able to choose another cantrip. I like grabbing Minor Illusion for a bit of mental trickery. We're also going to get to choose a level 2 spell, and I would say at this point you've got a few options. Any of the typical Bard options will work. Blindness, Hold Person, Invisibility, Knock, which would be very on theme. See Invisibility, again, would be very on theme. Enthrall, you've got a lot of different things to work with here. However, I like the idea that if you are running the Mistress spell mod, that you pick up Silvery Barbs. Silvery Barbs will force an enemy to reroll their attack or saving throw, and until the end of your next turn, you gain Silvery Luck, allowing you to give a friendly creature advantage on their next attack roll or saving throw. Basically, as a reaction, you get to say no, you reroll, and then you get to say to an ally, actually, you can reroll as well. It's very powerful, but I like it as kind of like a leader's skill, being able to take control of the battlefield in an instant. But if you think that's a bit too strong, or you don't want to use the Mistress Spells mod, even though I highly recommend you do, pretty much everything in this mod is very balanced, there's very few things that I would say are overpowered, then feel free to pick any of the typical Bard support options, but I really do think Silvery Barbs elevates this build just that little bit. And I would say because we're not going to be playing a full Bard, we're not going to get like all of the spell slots, and since this is a level 2 spell at base, you're not going to be using this all the time, you're just not going to have the capacity to. So otherwise, I quite like this one. I like the idea of, again, we just have this kind of luck aspect to our character, and I feel like Silvery Barbs helps with that, but by no means is it necessary for the build. We also do get to choose another feat at this point, and we're going to head on straight to the Actor feat, increasing our charisma by 1, bumping it up to an 18, and giving us expertise as well as regular proficiency, so expertise on top of that, for deception and performance. Boom, up. Perfect. So now we've got those 2 skill proficiencies as expertise, which is huge. I feel like deception is going to work out really nicely for us. And then finally, at level 5 of Bard, which I will quickly point out is technically optional. If you'd rather get an extra feat on this build, feel free to go for a 4-8 split rather than a 5-7 split, which I'm going to be showing off here. But I do like to go to level 5 of Bard because you get Font of Inspiration, which allows you to gain your Bardic Inspiration on a short rest back as well as giving us a slight bump to our Bardic Inspiration, increasing the power of our Bardic Inspiration and our Cutting Words. So I do think level 5 of Bard is a bit better, at least in my opinion, as well as the fact that you get to choose a level 3 spell, and on this build, I really want Speak with Dead. This allows you to speak with the dead. Shocking, but of course that means for our purposes, in a similar vein to Speak with Animals, we get to speak to corpses for an interview. How did you die? What killed you? What's all this blah 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 blah, you know. Again, a fantasy reporter is absolutely going to take statements from the dead and animals, which I think is just brilliant. So I like this here. Technically, yes, I do recommend this in the video as well, that you can get the Amulet from Withers' Tomb that will give you Speak with Dead a bit earlier on in the game, but it is only once per long rest, and this spell would allow you to have it a few extra times, though those of you who have played the game on multiple playthroughs will know when Speak with Dead is truly useful, and will know when to save that once per long rest used, and I mean obviously you're just long resting all the time anyway, so I would say this is up to debate as if you actually want to take this as part of your regular spell list, so feel free to swap this out if you like. Plenty of other good options here as I've already stated, but I just like picking it up just for that safety net in case you think, oh actually I want to speak to this guy, because you can, and that's what a good reporter would do. So popping back on over to Row, we're going to get the ability to dash, hide and disengage as a bonus action. Of course, these are all amazing. I love having more mobility options, especially on characters that are not meant to be part of the front line, which this one definitely isn't. I would say disengaging is actually probably going to be your most important one here, as it is going to synergize with some equipment that we will be using later. At Rogue level 3, we get to choose our subclass, and I initially went with Thief. And you absolutely could, that double bonus action can help, feel free to slap on dual crossbows, go to town. However, the more I thought about it, the more I liked Arcane Trickster. I've been using this one a lot lately. I think this is actually an incredibly underrated subclass, but let's talk about why. First off, we get Mage Hand Legerdemain, an invisible scout with infinite range that you can send ahead to scope out situations. And in a world with a potential magic camera, let's just say we now have an in-law reason for why photo mode exists, because the Mage Hand is holding the camera. It is the ultimate fantasy selfie stick. You're welcome. But in all seriousness, this is a very fun mechanic to play around with if you know how to use it correctly. You can use it as an artillery turret, throwing things that you leave next to it before combat, allowing it to deal all sorts of damage if you want to craft a bunch of grenades and such, which this build could do. There's also, you know, the added application of being able to sneak into places a lot easier, and again, the lore implications of just having this available to you for this type of character just feels so fun. But I can obviously see Thief working, totally makes sense. When Swashbuckler comes out on patch 8, I could absolutely recommend that. I think that also works if you want a bit more of a combat flair for this build. And even, oddly enough, I could see Assassin working, because imagine you open combat with like a spell or something that's like a surprise control spell, and then you immediately get your action and bonus action back to do all your other guffins. Like, actually, I think all of these could work, so make sure you pick your favourite. Anyways, but I'm going with Arcane Trickster today because it's going to give us access to some more spells, and I'm going to be choosing Booming Blade. Now, yes, this is from Mistress Spells, but when patch 8 comes out, this is going to be added to the game with pretty much the exact same implementation, so I might as well show it off here. Booming Blade is going to allow our weapon attacks, including our sneak attacks, to deal an additional 1d8 thunder damage at this level, and then if the target moves, they take even more thunder damage, and by the time this build is done, this cantrip will deal 2d8 extra thunder damage at base. For someone who's not going to be getting extra attack, this works amazingly for just giving us a full extra chunk of damage, and again, this working with sneak attack is just power that we'd be leaving on the floor if we didn't take it. But then, what do we take for our other spell? We kind of already have everything. For Mistress Spells, Mind Spike could be a nice option for you. Green Flame Blade is another alternative to Booming Blade in the rare situation that thunder damage won't work. You've got a bunch of options available to you. It really doesn't matter what you pick here, as again, we've pretty much got everything already. So because we're a human and we can't see in the dark, let's take the Light cantrip, because that feels flavorful. Moving on, we do get to choose some spells here from Arcane Trickster as well. And again, entirely up to you what you want to pick here. Since our intelligence isn't as high as our charisma, we might not want to take too many important spells that require spell save DC, but again, that's entirely up to you. I like to grab Disguise Self and Color Spray here. Disguise Self just fits the build really nicely. I mean, again, if you're going to be ticking people off by, you know, getting information that they might not want out into the world out of them, you're probably going to want to disguise yourself to get away, as well as Pocket Sand. Because, again, I feel like that just makes sense. Like, you get some information out of someone and before they go, wait, hang on a minute, and then you pocket sand and you're gone. I'm going to call this Pocket Sand until the end of the time, and you can't stop me. And finally, we do get to choose an expanded wizard spell list spell. Now, I'm going to be realistic here. The best spell to take here is Shield. 100%. Shield is just going to give us another kind of luck aspect to the build. Like, I like to flavor shield in this case as us kind of managing to stumble and accidentally dodge something rather than actually putting up a magical shield, even though the animation won't reflect that. But of course, this is going to help us with a lot of our survivability. Our AC ends up at about 18, so we're definitely going to want shield to bump us up in those situations where it will matter. But overall, it's just a solid defensive spell that's going to help us out a lot of the time. But if I was to go with my heart, I'd be picking Find Familiar, because come on, imagine this character with an animal companion. You know what? Get Scratch on this playthrough. It's gonna feel great, trust me. Moving on to Rogue level 4, we're going to gain access to an additional spell from the Arcane Trickster spell list. I'm going to go with, I would say, Sleep, works quite nicely, or Tasha's Hideous Laughter, or Charm Person, any of them will work. Pick your favourite. We also do get to choose to replace a spell if we so desire. And this is the cool thing about this. So as you can see, we can only replace spells that we already have, mostly from the Arcane Trickster spell list. However, we can replace those spells with anything from the expanded spell list. So there's a little trick if you want to be able to get expanded spells more than just the Arcane Trickster spells on an Arcane Trickster. Just replace the spells on every level and you'll have access to an expanded spell list. So that's kind of neat. Moving on though, we do get to choose another feat here. And at this point, you've basically got a free feat. With our stat boosting items, putting our dexterity and intelligence high enough that we don't have to worry about them, wisdom is already in a comfortable position and so is constitution, we don't need strength, and our charisma is already pretty good, I would say you've got a free feat here. Now in my testing I took lucky, because I feel like at that point it just makes sense. It's a very protagonistic ability, shall we say, giving you 3 luck points to give you advantage on attack rolls, ability checks or saving throws, or to make an enemy reroll their attack rolls. Kind of just a little bit more of what we already do, but with a new resource. However, of course, there are multiple things you could take. If you want to go into like a crossbow version of the build, then I could actually see Crossbow Expert feeling very flavorful on this build. Alert could definitely also make sense. You're always going to pick up on a new situation. I could see Dual Wielder working if you've got some strategies that could be worked with that. Mobile or Athlete both could also work. Ritual Caster, if you want some more ritual spells, that would allow you to get things you know, like Find Familiar or Speak with Dead for another means if you like. Also some other stuff if you are using Mistress spells. And of course there is also the Skilled feat, which would allow you to pick up 3 extra feats. Again, you'd be missing 1, but I don't think we need athletics on this build. So I would say if you picked up Medicine, Acrobatics, and Survival, you would have every skill that you could possibly need. Athletics we don't really need since we already have acrobatics in this case, and animal handling is completely useless with Speak with Animals, so barring 2 skills that we don't need, you've got skill proficiency in every relevant skill, and expertise in a few more. So overall, it's entirely up to you what you want to take at this level. You could even just take an ability score improvement and bump up your constitution or your charisma. Whatever works for you. Tough if you want some more HP. I could totally see most of these working, so I could even see you going with telepathic if you maybe if you went for slightly different ability scores to get the Detect Thoughts spell, which could also work really well for this build, but maybe kind of violates journalistic integrity. I don't know. I'll let you be the judge on that one. But there's so much available to you. In my testing, I do think Lucky gives you a slight extra bit of edge in combat and fits the build quite nicely. And since I don't think these other skills are 100% wholly relevant, I am going to recommend Lucky at this stage. For Rogue level 5, you're going to get Evasion. Your lightning quick reflexes allow you to protect yourself. When an attack hits you, you only take half the usual damage. I believe this is once per short rest or long rest. I always forget, especially when I'm in the middle of recording. Really should double check these things. So this isn't an infinite thing, but you can definitely make yourself a bit more tanky, and again, it kind of fits that Lucky flavor. And moving on to Rogue level 6, we're going to get 2 more skill expertise. And I would say at this point, you're going to want to grab Persuasion, absolutely. And I would say, well, we've already got Investigation and Insight. Arcana and History could be good. Sleight of Hand or Stealth could be good. But I think Intimidation, I mean, let's just round out the expertise in all charisma skills. Yeah, makes sense. We also do get to replace a spell at this point if we like, so feel free to change that up if you so desire. We obviously still only have access to level 1 spells though, so not much might change for you. But then finally at Rogue level 7, we're going to gain access to Evasion, allowing us to take no damage on a successful dex save, and only half damage if we fail, if we would normally take damage and it requires a dex save. This will synergize nicely with something we're going to get a bit later on. But for now, we actually do have access to level 2 spells, and you could have grabbed Silvery Barbs at this point, although it is a bit late in the build. This is the capstone. But of course, you get all the usual stuff, and I actually think that a cool weapon you could use on this build would be Shadowblade if you're using Mistress spells, or maybe want to grab the ring. This is just another fun way you could use that spell. But I actually ended up using Blur in my testing to give attackers disadvantage on attack rolls against us, and it worked pretty well. Between this and Shield, it's very unlikely that you're going to be hit, so you can be quite the artful dodger by the time you're done with this build. But of course, again, if you feel like something like Sleep isn't really doing it for you anymore at this level, which it probably isn't, you gain access to the entire level 2 wizard spell list, which is a lot to play around with. So feel free to mess around with this one. I'm definitely going to pick up Detect Thoughts because I kind of made a case for it earlier for this build, but feel free to grab anything you like. And that is the build. What you're going to be getting out of this is the leader of the party. You're an investigative journalist willing to go into any situation to get the scoop and expose the truth, making you basically a bona fide detective in the process. You're going to have a big damage with your sneak attack, you're getting a decent chunk of an extra 4d6 there, so you can do a bit of damage in combat, but you're mostly here to support your allies and debuff your enemies with your bardic inspiration from Lorebard. And of course, the main thing is not getting into combat at all. You're going to be able to do a lot of things with social checks and various different, skill checks in general, where you're just able to avoid dangerous situations altogether and keep yourself out of trouble. Hell, you could talk your way through most of Act 2 and only really have to fight Kethric's final form, and the rest of them will all just kind of die, which I think is amazing. That's one of the reasons I love this game, as you can talk your way through pretty much all of the boss fights in Act 2. And as well as, Act 3 will also be fun in that regard. I think you just have a lot to work with here, and I think the fact that you get pretty much all of the relevant skill proficiencies and expertise by total level 5 with this build means that this build comes online extremely quickly, especially when we talk about the equipment, because pretty much all of this stuff is in Act 1. So let's talk about it. First up, our final weapon of the build, I decided to go with the Harmonic Dueler. I don't really use this one enough, and I'll be honest, any finesse weapon will work. So if you want to be a bit more powerful, you can go for something like the Dueler's Prerogative in Act 3, Knife of the Undermounted King, just pick your favourite here, but I wanted to point out the Harmonic Dueler, because again, I don't really use it enough. You get this in Act 3, it's a +1 rapier, which seems a little bit underpowered, but then you look at its ability, Mellow Harmony. You make a performance check, which we have expertise on, and a success grants all of your melee weapon attacks additional damage equal to your charisma modifier. So it's a decent extra chunk of power for 10 turns, once per short rest. Could be fun if you decide to take the dual wielder feat and then maybe mix this with another more powerful weapon, and you could really go for kind of some crazy combos with this. But of course I kind of see this character as either mainly wielding like either a dagger or just a singular rapier, but that's just me personally. Speaking of, in the other game you could grab pretty much any dagger, which I feel like would make sense for like an early game version of this build. Maybe you're not so adept with weapons to start, so you just have like a small dagger, but then you kind of become a bit more able in combat as the campaign goes on, which I think could be quite fun. But I like the Susa Dagger in Act 1 because it can silence targets on hit. Once you get all the information out of them, make it so they can't speak ever again. Actually, that sounded a bit morbid. Maybe not quite like that. But this dagger has a fun side quest associated with it. But again, any dagger, rapier, short sword, anything with finesse, scimitar, it'll all work. Just make sure it's a finesse weapon. And I don't have any specific ranged weapons for this build, but I like hand crossbows. I think they work really, really well here. Grab the near misser or the Hellfire hand crossbow, or both. Either work, just go crazy. Any ranged weapon will do. But anyways, moving on to the equipment. First up, the Warped Headband of Intellect, as you already know, sets our intelligence to 17, so we've effectively got a 16 when it comes to our modifiers. This is going to help with our Arcane Trickster stuff, as well as intelligence saving throws, and just intelligence-based checks in general, which again, we're proficient in all of them. Well, except for medicine, but, or is medicine wisdom? Oh, don't do this to me, brain. Medicine is wisdom. Yeah, weird. Anyways, moving on. We also have the Cloak of Cunning Broom. When the wearer disengages, they create a foggy cloud around them. So, every time we disengage as a bonus action, we effectively throw down a smoke bomb in a 2-meter radius. It will blind us, but obviously we can move out the way immediately, and it means that if we stay there, ranged attacks can't really hit us because they need to be able to shoot us, as well as anybody who tries to attack us in there will have disadvantage. So overall, it can be pretty good for helping us avoid damage and getting out of sticky situations. Moving on to our armor here, I think the perfect endgame armor for this build is the elegant studded leather, giving you a +2 bonus to your initiative rolls, advantage on stealth checks, so you can scope out a situation before you get into it, maybe take some secret pictures, and it's also going to give you a usage of shield once per short rest that isn't going to take your spell slots. Overall, it's pretty generic as far as endgame options go, but hey, it works for a reason. It's damn good. But I would say in the early game, you can grab the studded leather +1 from many early game vendors, especially ones like the Zentarim after you complete that quest. I think it's pretty much guaranteed if you do that. Or as you kind of get into like the early mid-game, apparently this can spawn around level 6, is the padded armor +2, which I think looks really, really good if you're not using the modded camp clothing like I am. I think this is a damn good looking outfit for a build like this, and even the studded leather +1 also has a kind of nice vibe to it, but I do think the elegant studded leather is obviously the most powerful thing you can have, but as I always say, fashion trumps all, which is why I like my camp clothing. Of course, we have the gloves of dexterity, also obtained in Act 1, setting your dexterity score to 18. Now, obviously, I didn't really talk about it much at the start of the build, but you could obviously easily adjust your dexterity to be your highest stat if you want in the early game, and then respec once you get the gloves. And finally, we have the acrobat shoes, giving you advantage on dexterity saving throw checks. So now, mix this with our rogue ability that makes it so we take no damage on successful dex saves, we all of a sudden have a pretty solid defense against things like fireball, which I really like, and again kind of falls into that kind of luck aspect. Now for the amulets, let's say for some reason you don't have a cleric or druid in your party. Let's grab the silver pendant to give us guidance, a 1d4 bonus on any skill check we decide to make. It just makes us more self-sufficient and effective. We don't have to rely on cleric Shadowheart being in the party to do that if we don't want her to, so it just helps us to be a bit more self-sufficient, and it's obtained right away in Act 1, so you know, it's nice to have, but honestly I would say you could kind of change this into anything, including 2 other amulets I would recommend having on deck. And honestly, even if you have a main amulet that you use for combat, just keep these 3 in your inventory for when they could potentially be relevant. But you can also grab Uncovered Mysteries for Detect Thoughts once per long rest, if you think it's going to be useful, and the Amulet of Lost Voices, also obtainable in Act 1, allowing you to cast Speak with Dead once per long rest, as I previously stated. So yeah, just keep these 3 amulets on deck and have whatever you want in the main slot. Moving on, the Ring of Truthfulness, giving you advantage on insight checks. I mean, this is more of a lore and flavor thing, feel free to replace this if you want, but come on, it's the perfect ring for this build. And also we have the Ring of Mind Shielding, giving you advantage on saving throws against being charmed. We're the ones doing the charming. We know how charming magics work, and we also know how charming tongues work. Not in that way. Stop it. So making us have advantage on saving throws against being charmed, since we're not an elf who would get that naturally, I think it makes sense. And for our camp clothing here, we have the Bruja Oak Hide garb and the regular footwear boots to create this lovely look dyed in the vanilla muddy red dye to get this kind of like regal brown sort of like high society but also kind of like sporty and adventurous look, which I really like. This is a modded camp clothing, but I think which is available on all platforms anyway, but I do actually think there's a very close outfit to this just in the regular game as well, so feel free to use that. But yeah, that is the build, and what else can I say? I mean, it's fairly simple. Bard Rogue isn't exactly the most creative thing in the world, and I'm sure I'm not the first person to do a proper skill monkey build like this, but I think the flavouring and the way we go about it, and with our spell and equipment choices to help, you know, kind of further that, I just like the idea of this flavour and this character going into patch 8 when you actually do have the photo mode. I think for people who love roleplay like myself and who are still playing this game for that exact reason, not enough D&D in their lives, they are actually going to be able to get a lot out of the idea of playing a character who actually has an in-game lore reason to use photo mode, as well as a direct reason to have, you know, a progressive role in the campaign, discovering the truth of the Absolute, stopping Gortash, who obviously would be the height of corruption, would definitely be something we want to go for, and uncovering the mysteries of the secret order of assassins that are living under Baldur's Gate, hence the ball lists. So I don't know, I feel like this character will just have their finger in every pie, and I think it'll be quite fun to play overall. And again, playing a character who is so good at being the party face in every single way, being good at all of the mental checks, is just fun to use. Maybe it is a little bit heavy on the stat boosting equipment side of things. Obviously we're using 2 in a single build, and I did originally trial a version of this build where I thought, screw it, let's just have low dex and con and see how this goes. it didn't go well, which is why we're using the equipment that we have today. But feel free to play around with it, perhaps you like a bit of a challenge. But yeah, that is going to do it for me. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.